We are live now. Uh, Good evening, everyone. This is Soumi Ganguly, and I welcome you to today's digital discussion. This session is a part of our larger project called Forced Migration under TMYS Review March 2022 that is up and running in collaboration with Global South Colloquium, University of Victoria. Under this theme of forced migration, we are currently calling for submissions in the form of essays, stories, and poems. To know more about the project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. This evening, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists. The topic of today's discussion is frontline workers in the pandemic, and to share their thoughts, we have with us Ms. Puja Changoiwala, Dr. Roshan Radhakrishnan, and Dr. Niranjan Setty. They are all experts in this area with many years of professional experience. But before engaging with them in this discussion, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our speakers to our audience here tonight. Our first speaker in today's discussion is Ms. Puja Changoiwala, who is an award-winning journalist and author of three books, Homebound, Gangster on the Run, and The Front Page Murders. As a journalist, she writes about the intersections of gender, crime, social justice, human rights, and technology in India. Her work has been featured across the likes of BBC, CNN, The Hindu, The Guardian, National Geographic, The Wire, Foreign Policy, Al Jazeera, among other publications across the world. Previously a senior correspondent with Hindustan Times, Puja is a recipient of the International Center for Journalists COVID-19 Reporting Award, the Ladli Media Award for Gender Sensitivity, Red Ink Award for Excellence in Indian Journalism, Iceland Writers Award, among many others. Our second speaker tonight is Dr. Roshan Radhakrishnan. While he endeavors to ensure a serene environment for his patients inside the operation theatre, anesthesiologist and winner of the best blog in India for creative writing, as well as the only Indian to win first place in both season 1 and 2 of Write India, India's largest literary contest, Dr. Roshan Radhakrishnan does the converse as an author and blogger, encouraging his readers to think outside the box. Last but not the least, we have with us Dr. Niranjan Setty, who is a pulmonologist specializing in respiratory medicine, critical care, and sleep medicine. He is affiliated with Manipal Hospital Bangalore, Apollo Hospital Chennai, and South Essex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. He has been an active frontline worker in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we would move on to engaging with our speakers and hearing their views and opinions on today's topic. Our first speaker is Ms. Puja Changoiwala. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Swami. You read out my whole CV. We also have Mr. Giridharan with us if you'd like to introduce him. Or I
Yes,
could.
definitely. Yes, ma'am. So, before plunging headlong into the discussion, I would also like to talk about Mr. Ramaswamy Giridharan. 52-year-old R. Giridharan has recently published a widely appreciated murder mystery titled Right Under Your Nose, published by Rupa Publications. He is currently a general manager with the Reserve Bank of India, where he is in charge of training and development. He is an international sports commentator with All India Radio and has also anchored many panel discussions, along with being a behavioral trainer. He also holds certifications in many psychometric instruments. His articles have been published in prestigious publications like the Economic Times, creekinfo.com, IBA Journal, etc. He sets sights on those locals that others do not venture into and weaves his rich and unique array of skills and experiences into his stories. We are very privileged to have you with us, sir. So, moving on to Ms. Changoiwala, uh, over to you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Shami. So, since we already have two doctors on the panel, I would like to talk. When I think about frontline workers, of course, I think about doctors like Dr. Shetty and Dr. Radhakrishnan. But because we already have them on the panel and they would know better about doctors, I would like to talk about Asha workers, who were the million women frontline workers manning the first line of defense for COVID-19 in our country. ASHA workers are basically, I mean, for those who are not aware, ASHA is an acronym for Accredited social health activists. And in our country, they are the first point of contact between the community and our health workforce. Now, historically, they have been employed to ensure that we have institutional deliveries and to ensure that, maternal and neonatal health is taken care of well. But they've always been pressed into other healthcare services, like whenever we had to deal with diseases like malaria, tuberculosis. And when COVID 19 happened, these were the women who were first pressed into service in rural India. They were the first point of contact through which information was disseminated to the rural parts of our country because they are so close to the ground. Now, I did quite a few stories on Asha workers and how they were struggling to avail basic necessities, although they were the first line of defense. Now, these are women who are aged 25 to 45 years or year old. Some of them are widows, some of them are childless. I mean, basically social stigmas that turn them into this. Turn them to this field often, not always. Now, when I spoke to them, I realized that as soon as March 25, within days of the lockdown, they were out on the field. They were campaigning, they were creating awareness about the disease, they were collecting travel histories, they were surveying people with cough, cold, and fever symptoms. But when I spoke to them, I realized that they themselves were so unprotected and they were so exposed to the disease themselves. For instance, the biggest problem was that there was no formal training. As I said, they were there within 2 days of India announcing the lockdown. So I asked them, "आपको कोई formal training मिली थी क्या?" And they were like, nahi, humko central government had announced an online session. Now, these are women who are not highly educated. First of all, they do not know how to access these online sessions. Secondly, a lot of them do not have access to internet at all because, ASHA workers are on the ground in the remotest part of the countries, in tribal areas which are highly far-fetched. So there is no question of internet, although we speak of the Digital India movement. They do not have access to internet. And those who had offline sessions, for instance, this one worker I spoke to, she told me, I had a 30-minute briefing in a local hospital where they did not tell us कि तुमको खुद को क्या precautions लेने हैं. They just told us कि जाओ, किसको सर्दी खांसी बुखार है, just find that out and come back and report to us. That was one issue. Then there was the second issue was that they did not have basic protective gear like masks, sanitizers, gloves. Sorry, I'm a little unwell. Mask sanitizers or gloves. Like for instance, there was this one group of ASHA workers who in somewhere in the northeast who told me that they were given half a bottle of sanitizer each and one disposable mask. How is somebody who is supposed to be on the field every day? For the entire day, every day, supposed to manage with one mask and half a bottle of sanitizer. So they started a protest and then they were given a few disposable masks each and they were given one bottle of sanitizer each. Now, even this was quite exasperating because these are not things that you need to ask the state for. These are things that need to be provided for you, especially when they know that you are in the first line of. Sorry, I think I might have to consult a few doctors on this panel later. So yeah, they are supposed to be given these things, and yet they were just thrown onto the field without basic security gear. Then there was abuse. Now, if you might, as you might remember, there was a lot of stigma attached to the COVID-19 disease, and when these ASHA workers would go out on the field to survey the people, they met with a lot of resistance. I heard stories of abuse. I heard stories of stones being pelted. I heard abuses of hot water. In one case, there was hot water thrown on an ASHA workers because they wanted to shoo them away. Then I think it was in Karnataka or somewhere where a mob of 100 people attacked these ASHA workers. So, I mean, a lot of instances like these came to the fore, and it took a lot of furrow, it took a lot of such instances before the state could act and before the state could bring about amendments in certain laws. But for starters, they should have been protected. Then the fourth issue that I came across was the ostracism. I mean, in villages, as you might be aware, there is this crazy trend of social boycott, where, for instance, I was reporting on. These migrants who were returning to their villages, sorry, migrants who were returning to their villages, and their houses were painted with messages like danger inside. So similarly, these Asha workers, they were ostracized from the society. Their homes, their families, the villagers placed a blanket ban on their families, saying, so they're socially boycotted. Nobody will talk to them. Their families cannot fetch water from the common well and things like that. And the fifth was ostracism from their own homes. So I met this one Asha worker in Maharashtra, in rural Maharashtra. She was telling me how she surveyed a family of coronavirus patients, and later her own family wouldn't let her inside their house. She was asked to sleep outside the house, and she couldn't help it because these women in general are extremely committed to their jobs, and she could not stop doing what she had to do, so she had to live outside their home. So I mean, I wouldn't say that it is just the pandemic that has uh, worsen their realities. I'll say that the pandemic has only exposed their realities, because Asha workers, they are actually considered as volunteers. They're not government employees. They're not considered as government employees. So they do not have any benefits like insurance, paid leaves, even regularized salaries. They have performance-based incentives. For instance, if they ensure immunization of a child within a year of its birth, they are paid 100 rupees. If they ensure an institutional delivery, they're paid 300 rupees. And with COVID, they were promised some 3,000 rupees for 3 months of work. Many of them never got those salaries, but then they just continued working. And it was just alarming. It was sobering, their commitment to the job, because a lot of them told me कि नहीं फ़र्क पड़ता है कि क्या सैलरी आ रही है, नहीं आ रही है। मैं I have been living in the village. I have been taking care of these families for decades now. And now, when this global catastrophe has fallen upon us, how do I abandon them? So, I think for me, the frontline workers, I think the biggest casualty were these million women who were standing on the front lines and who remained neglected for a very, very long time.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for holding to light the precarious states of ASHA workers, most of who have remained unprotected, untrained, and even not so talked about. Thank you very much for your insightful comments. And I would now like to invite Mr. Giridharan to share his opinions on today's discussion. So over to you, sir.
Well, as far as the bankers are concerned, we were faced with a frequent problem. No, we, of course, were not as knowledgeable as maybe the doctors are on what dangers the pandemic brought and what precautions we actually had to follow beyond beyond these very minimal things like wearing a mask and sanitizing yourself and keeping a social distance. Beyond that, we weren't very much aware. But we were told from the very beginning that the success of banking industry alone can help the survival in this pandemic times, because we knew that all payments would have to be made through the internet. Everybody is going to sit at home and order online. Now, people take the credit card payments, the online banking, or even these Paytm and other things for the electronic wallets. They take it for granted. What they don't realize is each, when you do a transaction, there is a server, a central server. That central server has to do two things. It has to route it further to the destination. Second, it also has to check the accuracy and ensure that a fraud doesn't take place. Now, the staff was less, the volume of this increased manifold. And we knew that this had to run 24 by 7. Now, after all, somebody goes to a hospital, he uses the credit card. We cannot have a situation that the hospital is not able to accept the credit card or the payment system is not functioning. So, not people weren't aware of how critical the work of the banks were during this pandemic. We had a strategy called the Beat Up COVID, where we started benchmarking. BE stood for benchmarking. We said, well, these are certain things on which we cannot have any margin or any room for error. In certain cases, we'll work at 70%, certain areas 50%. Like that, we did a benchmarking. Then we had to do the administration. We will rotate the staff. We will have staff at some locations. Some people, vulnerable people, pregnant women, the staff members with small children coming from long distances, we'll try and exempt them. That was the other administrative part that we did. We tweaked the timings. There was no need to have the usual timings because customers were not going to come. But a very important problem that started coming for us, which it was like this, the post offices were closed for nearly 3 months. I think April 2020, May 2020, June 2020, there was no post office. Suddenly, somewhere on July 11th of 2020, we received 4 or 5 gunny bags full of letters. All the letters that had not been delivered for 3 or 4 months suddenly got delivered through the gunny bag on one day. And all of a sudden, and now with those gunny bags coming, and we don't know who handled and the papers inside, we had a massive outbreak of COVID within the campus itself. A lot of people contracted the a lot of people contracted the disease on account of handling those papers. A lot of people contracted the disease. So, and we really didn't know that then this aspect that all primary contact, how we do, then we hit upon small solutions. What we did was everywhere we removed the use of hand. Everywhere we put up foot operated doors. Every door could be operated by foot. Every tap was replaced with the sensor tap. So, and then we invested in those small UV machines so that every paper which came could be put into the UV machine. So that these are small investments by which we could help our people. Then we started the testing tracking methodology. That is, everybody would be tested periodically. We would refund the testing. We would refund the testing part of it. That is something that we said that let us encourage people into testing. So, and then we would track. So, one of the things that this testing had enabled in the very early days, when people were scared of testing, we encouraged everyone to go for testing and we reimbursed the testing. As a result of which, people were getting early, if at all they were caught with the disease, they were caught in the earlier stages. So, they were not caught unawares. We As we gradually began to open up, we had other incidents also because the ATMs were never getting used. ATMs were not getting used. There was an incident of a snake lodging itself in the ATM all of a sudden. Because no one came, the snake thought that it's a cozy place to be in. So somewhere, I think in UP or somewhere, you found a snake inside a ATM. But the problem for the bankers came in March and April 2021 because things suddenly opened up. The crowd started surging into the branches, and there was a sense of complacency. The first wave of the pandemic, bankers did not suffer that much. But in the second wave, that is from March to June 2021, a number of bankers contracted the disease. Some of them lost their lives. Some of them lost their near and dear ones. Some of them have paid heavily in terms of their health, even though they are alive. So, somewhere, this was a sobering thought. And we have now decided to invest a great deal towards counseling and de stressing because we found that the mental stress was much more. The fear of the disease or the associated aspects, the instability, the volatility, these things affected the mind more. Efficiency came down, health got affected on account of the stresses. So, de stressing was another important aspect that we have laid upon in the banking industry. So somewhere I think the banks played a role which is not known to many. Nothing could have worked if the banking industry had not risen to the occasion. There were people, we made makeshift beds for people because it didn't make sense for people to go home every day and come back. So people would stay for 3, 4 days at a stretch, somehow making arrangements for food, making some kind of makeshift beds, etc. Since the beginning was in the summer, people didn't need warm clothes or anything. It was possible. And by the time October, November came, the gradual opening up had begun. So to that extent, I think we were also helped. So somewhere I do believe that bankers had contributed greatly in combating the pandemic, and the prime minister had also at one time appreciated the bankers too, just like the Asha workers and the medical workers and the police. I think bankers were also one of those who were there in the front line in a different way.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comments. Even while making online transactions, we never realized what is going on behind it, and how the bankers have kept the economy of the country running smoothly. And even when their health, their physical and mental health was severely compromised. Thank you very much, sir. And now I would like to move on to Dr. Roshan Radhakrishnan to hear his opinions on frontline workers in the pandemic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good evening and thank you for having me. I'll try to give you a unique glimpse into the world of doctors working inside COVID ICUs and dealing with the most severe cases of COVID. It's safe to say that not just the public, but even as doctors and doctors across the world were blindsided by the onset and spread of this disease. Before 2020, we had only ever seen scientists in movies wearing these ungainly hazmat like suits. The thought that this would become our daily uniform was unfathomable at the start of this decade. So that comes to the key question: how did we as doctors cope? You see, unlike most professions and even some medical specialties, a doctor working in the ICU does not have the luxury of work from home. The policy was always do our best and prepare for the worst. We began by changing the very rooms within the hospital. We created new ICUs because we had to separate COVID patients from non-COVID patients. You needed a third ICU, in fact, so that before the patient gets diagnosed to have COVID or not, they can be separately isolated. Staffs themselves were divided into teams of two or more during this lockdown, increasing the burden for each team of doctors, but also reducing the risk of losing all the members of a department should one member get infected. In addition to this, regular online meetings were held to keep track of all the information that was flowing in, and we used to modify our own protocols accordingly. You need to realize there was no textbook for this. We were the words being written in this unique chapter of healthcare, experiencing and creating history firsthand. And as you can imagine, it has not been easy at all. Um, it's not just about donning a PPE suit and writing notes in a file. In these humid, suffocative suits, we would be called upon to perform emergency life saving procedures at all hours of the day. Procedures that often require pinpoint precision movements. The waves of COVID, as everyone has rightly pointed out, they were the worst times. During these peaks, we would struggle to accommodate all the patients that came. So many instances arose within hospitals all across India, frankly, and even globally, where patient care suffered because of a shortage of everything from beds, oxygen, medicine, ventilators. Moments like this, where we've lost patients despite our best efforts due to the lacunae of something like, the easily available medicine, these can be really demoralizing. But also, you have to think from the patient's point of view. On Sunday, they would have woken up blissfully unaware in their own beds and had a regular life with their family. By Tuesday, they were on ventilator support in an ICU, isolated from their loved ones, surrounded just by faceless people like me, inside PPE suits, faces fully covered, hovering all around them. For so many, this ghost like vision was the last thing they ever saw. I can only imagine how scary it must have been for them. Of course, we also have had to deal with family relatives who would be experiencing the 5 stages of grief. Their reactions could be varied and understandably so. So, sometimes you would have people who would be grateful that their loved ones passed away without too much suffering or pain. And at the other extreme, yes, we did have people who got angry and aggressive just at the news that things may have taken a turn for the worse. Um, all of this, in addition to this, you need to realize, even though we have official statistics for this many people suffered from COVID, these many recovered, as many as sir has pointed out also, even after being turning negative from COVID, so many would suffer post COVID complications, and that would define their lives in the days ahead. They would return back to the hospitals and again end up in our ICUs, where we would now have to look after them and watch them suffer once more. It is an extremely harrowing time period for both the patient and the relative. Conversely, there's definitely a joy in seeing patients leave the ICU after recovering, though, and that the incidence of this did increase post vaccination. I can tell you from personal experience, I am alive today because I was vaccinated on time. I have seen 19-year-old girls pass away from COVID, and I've seen a 102-year-old also pass away. I've seen a 96-year-old survive and come out of the ICU. Honestly, when you see all this, you don't expect to survive when you contract the disease. When I got the disease, the first thing I did was I wrote down all my debit card and bank account and insurance details, and I handed it to my loved ones. That's what happens working in this ICUs. You come to terms with your own finite mortality. Today, the way I see things, life is almost back to normal for most of us. Yes, there are some restrictions, but you know it's nothing as bad as it was during the first and the second waves. In the background, there is the fear of Omicron coming. I don't know how that will pan out, but still, there is a certain confidence amongst everyone today. uh, you can see everyone is busy planning which theater to watch the new Spider-Man movie, where to go for dinner, who to meet, and all that. We didn't have that luxury earlier. But for us frontline workers, even today, things haven't actually changed. As long as even one patient remains inside the ICU or in any COVID ward, we will still be donning this PPE suit and heading back inside to look after you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's very scary and heartbreaking at the same time to know how doctors have coped up with this uh, unprecedented situation. And at times it seems that there's no end to it. It keeps on happening, waves after waves coming. So many people are succumbing to this. And it must have taken a horrible toll on your mental health, on your physical health. It must have been such a stressful situation.
Uh,
As much as I want to thank you this entire medical fraternity for helping us. Thank you for giving us your opinions on this as well. And now I would like to move on to our final speaker tonight, Dr. Niranjan Setty. Mm, I think we have lost him. Oh no,
no, he's
he's here.
back.
Over to you, sir.
Oh, hi. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for giving this opportunity. And the second thing is, I think, like just I heard everyone speaking, and I mean, it's just not how the initial when Ms. Puja spoke about the Asha workers. I think that's actually a excellent, valid point, and even the bankers. So it's just not us. I mean, doctors and nurses who are doing an important job during this pandemic. I feel the whole sector, including someone who's delivering food. If you order online for food, I think even that person carries a high risk of catching the virus. So every person, every single person has contributed, and we are still fighting this virus. and we have long. I mean, we still have a long way to go because of this new strain, and I think we will come across a lot more strains before this ends. So Dr. Roshan focused on how it was difficult to cope with the new things like donning PPE and and staying in PPE for us to together, and patient not able to recognize. We have our own picture of us on the PPE, or sometimes we have a name that we put across, and it becomes easy for them to at least identify. And sometimes we do video chats with the patients to able to at least have a face-to-face discussion at times. So it was everything was new, and everything was like learning on the go. So we had no idea what we are dealing with. We had no deadline. Like, I mean, we had no endpoint whether we are going to, at some point all this ends. And even today, it's been nearly 2 years. Even today, we have patients with COVID and who are really sick, young patients, not like old and like Dr. Roshan said, we have 100-year-old who sometimes recover and go, and we have as young as 19, 18 years and die with COVID. So these are all very new for us, for all of us, and it takes a toll on us. And we actually, I think one of the important point which was asked for me to speak about is isolation or quarantine from family members. This is my personal thing. I haven't visited my parents in 2 years. I haven't seen any of my family members in 2 years because of the travel restrictions. Because if I go home, I need to isolate there again. And coming back here, again, I have to isolate. So there's a lot of travel restrictions, and I haven't seen my family in 2 years. So this is just a personal experience. So, like this, many people during the first wave, especially. So, like this, many people because we don't know how this
I think there are some network disturbances at his end. We'll wait for some time for his network to be stable again.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. I think we will move on to the question and answer section, and we will again join Mr. Setty in some time for. Yeah, I don't think he's there with us now because I think he has lost his connection. So maybe we will be joined by Mr. Setty in some time. Now I would quickly move on to the question and answer section. Uh, So, after having addressed how the pandemic has impacted the lives of frontline workers and the society as a whole, I would now like to ask our speakers some pertinent questions. My first question is to Ms. Changoiwala. Ma'am, you have already shared with us your opinions on how the Asha workers have been working through this global pandemic. My first question to you is do you think the precarious state of the frontline workers' lives have been sufficiently addressed by the media?
Yes, I think I would say so because around that time, for instance, now I remember these doctors in Uttarakhand. Now, Uttarakhand, you should understand that it's not a state which makes front page headlines often. It does not get prime time slot on our news channels. But during the pandemic, again, there were these health workers which were faced with a lot of shortages. And there was a news report about them, I think, in the Times of India or some big national newspaper. And after that happened, the things which were missing, they were delivered to these workers. So, I mean, if a place like Uttarakhand, if some villages in Uttarakhand that can get that kind of coverage, I would like to believe that we did do enough. But I think there always remains a gap, because there are some far-fetched villages in the tribal belts of our country, the rural belts of our country, which always remain uncovered. I mean, which always remain far from the media gaze. But one section of frontline workers whom I think did not get enough attention was our sanitation workers. You know, we are home to some 5 million sanitation workers, and we have these Dalits who are uh, the lower castes. And these are the sanitation workers, and they pick up human waste. They pick up a lot. They pick up garbage on the streets of Bombay, in the street, on the streets and villages everywhere. And these were the people who were again doing it without protective gear, without equipment. And I mean, on a normal day also, you know, when they pick up medical waste, they have these syringes that keep, like, I was talking to this one garbage collector, and he was telling me कि मैडम वैसे भी हमारे पैर में सिरिंज जाती है, पर ये टाइम पे जब सिरिंज जाती है तो और डर लगता है, because you do not know what this disease is, and you do not know where it will come, you know, attack you. So I think this was one group of workers who was largely neglected, and they were battling coronavirus unarmed. They were still doing their job for the meager salaries they make, and yet they were not given the kind of protection they deserved.
Very true. How many sections of the society still remain so underrepresented, misrepresented in very many ways. Thank you for answering that question. My next question to you is: have the governments at both the central and state levels worked towards alleviating the hazards faced by the frontline workers? What are your opinions on this?
I'd say in some cases, yes, because, you know, like I said, there were a lot of attacks on these frontline workers, including doctors and healthcare workers and Asha workers and everybody. So they announced some amendments to this Epidemic Diseases Act, and which increased the punishment for such crimes to up to 7 years, and the fine ran up to in lakhs of rupees. And at the same time, no, because I remember doing a story for The Wire, because a few doctors in Kashmir, they leaked this circular to me, where the Directorate for Health Services had said that whoever in Kashmir, any doctor in Kashmir who posts against the administration saying that we have a shortage of an equipment, or we do not have PPE kits, if they talk about the shortage to the media, or if they post such stuff online, they will be imprisoned for 6 months. Now, this is something that I found. I mean, already the frontline workers are in the first line of defense, as I kept saying, and then you threaten them with such things. I mean, are they supposed to fight an enemy that cannot be seen, or are they supposed to, try and protect their jobs? So I think this was. I'm so sorry. So I think this was something which was horrible. And you must understand that Kashmir is a region in conflict. And like I think Dr. Radhakrishnan spoke about online consultations and all. And doctors in Kashmir did not have that option, because the state was under an information blockade since August 2019. So they were already very stressed out. And then bringing these kind of conditions, I think it already, suppresses the confidence. It shatters the morale of the doctors in the region. So I think it was really mixed. Some places they did do a decent job, and the others, I think it was pure shameful.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yes, definitely, because there still remains a lot to be answered and spoken about this. Thank you very much for addressing both our questions. I think we have Dr. Setty with us now. Uh, Dr. Setty, if he can resume his discussion. Yeah, we have him with
Yes, can you
us.
hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. I think there was some disconnection. Basically, I think the Wi-Fi was really bad, so I was able to connect. Yeah, sure. All right. Uh, uh, so is it okay now? Connection is fine now?
Connection is fine, but we cannot see you. Uh, I don't know if your camera is switched off, but we can hear you.
Is is the connection okay now? Can I speak?
Yes, sir, you can definitely continue your discussion.
S- all right. Okay. So um, all right. I'm really sorry about this disconnection. So I was just, I mean, my main focus was on healthcare workers' mental status of it. So the main reason why I wanted to focus on it is because it's just not physical exhaustion at the end of the day. So you are really pushed to the wall, and you've been working nearly 12 hours, at times 14 to 16 hours in a day, and many co-workers fall sick, and we are all at risk of catching the infection at any point, any time. So once some co-worker falls sick, it's our responsibility to take up that job, and we need to continue the service that we are providing to the patients. So uh, this was a constant issue for us. Even today, even this morning, we had at least 10 junior doctors who called in sick because they all tested positive for COVID. So this is a constant issue, and we say that vaccination prevents severe infection, but it doesn't prevent mild infection. So sometimes, if you test positive, you have to isolate yourself to prevent spreading the virus to the patient. So it's our responsibility to not to harm the patient. So at the end of the day, we are still trying to cope with this new disease, and we are still trying to figure out how we can maximize and improve the patient safety and also outcome of the patients. So I think recently there was a survey both in India, UK, and many other places in the country addressing the mental health status of the healthcare workers, both nurses and doctors. And at this point, WHO has told that globally there are a shortage of 6 million nurses all over the world. So that's a lot of nurses, and even today, at this point of time, also we don't have 1:1 patient and nurse ratio for sick patients. So each nurse handles at least 3 patients, 4 patients, which is a lot of patients to handle, and it takes a lot of toll on them. And like I said, initially we had to isolate ourselves from the family. A lot of nurses and doctors were not able to see their children at the end of the day, and this added to the extra bit of mental strain to them. And it's not only mental exhaustion, you feel burnt out, and you won't be able to continue the work. So um, and we have every hospital, every trust has their own policy to improve the mental health of the workers, but that doesn't address individually as a person. So I think this is where our main focus should be in the future to handle any pandemic or any kind of situation. It's not only health kind work, health like I mean health workers. It's actually it applies to every other job. I think it should be the mental health should be an individual focus rather than as a umbrella term to improve the work output from the healthcare workers. So I feel at the end of the day, I feel we are still fighting this virus, and we have a long way to go, and everyone has their own role, and everyone should help, and everyone should get together in fighting this virus rather than just leaving it to either government or just the doctors or the nurses. It's everyone has to play their role in fighting this virus. I think thanks so much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful talk. Definitely, we are not an end of this, and the entire world is reeling under the repercussions of this global pandemic, and it must be very difficult for the frontline workers to manage with the stress, this what to say, this mental anxiety, this exhaustion, this physical burden. It's so much. It's just an endless list that they have to cope with. And now, thank you, sir, for your comments. Now, I would like to ask the questions to Mr. Giridharan. Uh, Sir, you have also already talked to us how the bankers have been working during this pandemic. So, my first question to you is, as a senior member of the bankers fraternity, how have you managed to ensure an efficient working of the organization you work with? As in, the steps or the measures that you must have implemented to maintain the working of your system?
Well, actually, for us, we had a different problem to face because the pandemic came in March, and March is the busiest season for all the bankers. That is the time when you're working 24 by 7. Suddenly, it was somewhere around March 18, 19 that we were beginning to be told that there is something very serious. And people were out in the field, some were doing inspection in far-flung corners of various states, some others probably doing recoveries from debtors, some going to sell, marketing their products. So people were in different corners of the state, and suddenly we didn't know which part, whether there would be transport, whether there would not be transport, or in case somebody contracted the disease, uh, how would they manage it when they are not at home, if they are on tour. So we really had to, and many of the tasks are such, in every field it is like this. You cannot leave something incomplete and go. You cannot leave something in between. It's so there are certain, I mean, it may not be a surgery, as a doctor cannot leave a surgery in between and come, but even in there are certain banking operations as well. You can't leave it in between and come. So, but then what we had to do was we had to find a via media where you just do some sort of stitching up kind of thing, leave it in an as is where is position, and then you can come back to see it later. Now, this, when you do such a thing, there is a threat that there can be frauds, financial frauds of varying degrees if you're going to do this. But we had to take a call. Human lives were going to be more important than any losses due to fudging of books and financial aspects. So we had to call back people. We took a decision that whoever is, wherever he or she is, come back to your headquarters. It doesn't matter what happens to the work. We need you first. So that was an important message that we gave. The other thing that we tried was we maintained a liaison with the medical community. So we had tie-ups with hospitals, ambulances, etc. And whenever anyone contracted the disease, we would try and be in touch with the family members, assure them that they would get all the support from the organization. So it is always good, when the organization starts using its clout to help anybody who has contracted a disease. At that point of time, it was fearful. I don't think people have been as scared of any disease as it was for COVID in 2020 and even the earlier part of the second wave. It is almost as if the disease came, we thought it's a death warrant. And as I think one of the doctors here on the panel was mentioning, that all of a sudden he started writing out the will kind of thing, the nominations. Our workload on this count increased by more than 3000%. All of a sudden, everybody was coming and saying that I want to nominate my account, I want to nominate this. I suddenly realized I hadn't done mine for many things. You take life for granted, and then suddenly you realize the workload on this front increased tremendously. And that is why now we are trying to We have been doing it for some time, but now it has become very, very advanced. Now, a person, especially senior citizens, they can sit at home and upload their life certificate. Otherwise, earlier they had to go to the branch and prove that they were alive so that the pension keeps coming to them. Now we have relaxed that. So these are the innovations also we had to think. Now, while this was on the front of, helping people combat with COVID, we had another problem at hand. How do we save the businesses? We realized any contact intensive industry, the hotels, the hospitality, the beauty industry, these were going to be hit very hard. The low skilled workers were going to be hit very hard. So, it's all in a theory, you can say that this is creative destruction, low skill is giving way to higher skill. In theory, it is great. But the fact is, when somebody loses a job, I mean, the family is in deep distress. So, we had to devise schemes. We had to ensure that money flows into the needy sectors. And of course, there will be leakages, but the flow of money had to be constant. Liquidity had to be maintained in the system in such a way that you should be awash with funds. At no point of time should anyone think that cash is at a shortage. Now, I think there was also a mention about, that people shouldn't talk about shortages, etc. We had a reverse problem. We would find rumors swirling that from tomorrow there won't be internet banking, from day after tomorrow there won't be any cash, no banking is coming to a halt, this is going to be stopped, that is going to be stopped. So we had the reverse problem, wherein rumors would swirl and panic would be created when there was no problem at hand. So somewhere while I am an advocate of not putting an embargo on sending messages, news, etc. But I think they also have a harmful effect if not curbed, because there are certain mischievous elements who take advantage of all the freedom and everything. So probably during times of grave crises, I mean, pandemic was almost a wartime. So maybe somewhere certain restrictions on these fronts need to be brought. And we also, each time we saw others suffering, we always appreciated the frontline workers, like the Asha workers and all. We saw the BMC people always coming, cleaning up the garbage, coming to houses, pasting that sticker that this building is sealed or whatever it may be. They would be out there in the middle. The doctors, of course, no praise can be too high. The police perennially patrolling and telling others to wear masks, etc. Whenever we would see any one of them falling ill, the panic among us would be much higher. We would think that if a doctor is not able to guard himself or herself, where do we stand? And I'll tell you, there was an occasion when the it was on the April 9th, 2020. My office at that time was in the World Trade Center. World Trade Center, as you know, is a huge building. It has got three multi-stories, three buildings of more than 25 stories, and other buildings as well. So at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the security people, they came to me and they said, "Sir, when are you leaving for home?" I said, "Why do you want to know that?" They said that you are the only person in the entire building, the building which normally houses around 3,000, 4,000 people. I was the sole person apart from the security persons around. Suddenly, then it is at that time that I realized that we were facing different dangers. What if something, you get caught in the lift, or if the security people not checking locked it, because there were 3 days holidays after that. If they had locked the door, what do you do for 3 days? I mean, you can't even order from Swiggy inside a locked room. What do you do? No one can come and do so. Suddenly, a different kind of a fear gripped me, and then we had to find an SOP for such a situation also. So then we started ensuring that, there is this kind where people come in at least groups in each floor. There are one or two people and they are in touch with each other through the intercom. So all that SOPs we had to do. We also faced certain panic situations when people would tell us, hospitals have rung us up and told us that they are having problems with their payment mechanisms. So those were the times when we thought that really we were being tested, because we knew that if the payment mechanism in a hospital didn't work, on a very famous hospital, I don't want to name it, but if it was not going to work, then it would cause more pandemonium than anything in the pandemic did. And fortunately for us, we could resolve the situation very quickly. And people have never come to know that such a situation had arisen. So we could keep it under wraps, and because the situation never went out of control, the news never came out. And I'm sure in every profession, there must have been such things. And while we talk of banking, I must also compliment the IT professionals, because in the IT people are not the part of the bank, but they were our vendors. But they were there also to help us whenever we needed. So I must compliment them as well in this entire journey that we had.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing with us how difficult it was for for the bankers to work efficiently when a contagious disease was on the loose. In fact, it is on the loose even now, but still things have returned to some kind of a normalcy, some kind of a semblance of normalcy, if I may. Thank you very much for that detailed explanation. And now, my next question is to Dr. Radhakrishnan. Uh, you have already talked to us about your experiences as a frontline worker. With regard to that, I would like to ask you, as in how, given how stressful the lives of healthcare workers already are, how are they coping with the sudden surge in responsibilities and duties post-pandemic? Because we have come across videos of doctors who are working for 18 hours, 19 hours at a stretch without any relaxation, without being able to relax or without getting any free time. So how are they managing to work in this situation? It must be very difficult. So this is my question.
See, the honest truth is that there was no alternative. We didn't have a second option. As you know, India has one of the worst doctor to patient ratios in the world. A disease like this just made things worse. On top of our limited number of doctors, you have to understand that barely around 50,000 of these doctors, out of maybe 12 or 14 actively working doctors, are actually trained to handle ICUs and the worst of COVID patients. So the only way to make up for that deficiency was we had to rope in doctors from other specialties, and even medical students and postgraduates took over. They had to learn quickly on the job and save lives as it is. Thinking back, I don't know how I would have managed if I was in their situation when I was a student. It's because of this extra efforts made by all these people that we did as well as we managed in the end. Coming to the stress of it all, that's a different thing, and that's something which has been pointed out by the others also in this panel. The tension, the mental torture, being away from your family, and that is something you have to actively choose and do at times. To save your own parents, you have to take the decision that you won't go home. And these are all things that take a mental toll on you, frankly. I read an article in this week's UK Sunday Times where a clinical psychologist who's researched, I think, over 1,300 frontline workers. He was worried with Omicron coming there because most of the workers were refusing to go back. They were refusing to be redeployed back into the ICUs and the wards. He stated that you can't keep putting these workers through this level of repeated trauma and distress without seeing some sort of psychological impact. Here in India, our patient load is, well, probably at least tenfold of what the doctors there have to face. And yet, a simple "how are you doing?" something we've never really been asked by the relatives of the patients or even by the patient, though that is asking for too much. Um, I'm sure working in COVID wards and ICUs are mentally, those who are working there are mentally exhausted. But in the end, we know that there's no other option. If we go, there is no one else to take over. Uh, what can I say? We have to look out for one another. That'll probably be my parting words to all the frontline workers. Make time for what you love to do as well in the gaps. You cannot be a bright light of hope for everyone else if you yourself end up burned up.
Definitely, sir. Along the same line, a question that you have already addressed, but I would still like to ask you if you can share an anecdote or something that relates to how doctors' mental health has been compromised, as in how. After even after knowing that this is not going to end anytime soon, and maybe they're succumbing to depression or anxiety, how they manage to stand tall to work in this situation, because when you know that there is an end to something, you still prepare for the end because you know that better days are awaiting, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But in this situation there's no such thing. So how did you manage with this stress?
uh, when I was speaking earlier, I had mentioned about the 5 stages of depression and how we meet relatives going through various aspects of that. There would be bargaining, there'll be anger, there'll be proper, rather depression itself, and then finally you come to acceptance. The truth is, this is what the doctors in India who are working in COVID are also going through. The 5 stages of grief, rather, the depression. We went through all of that. We were depressed initially, we've been angry. When we hear of instances of violence or lack of payments in other states and other doctors, the thing is, with social media being the way it is, today we get these images and these articles instantly. Something that happens in Kashmir, I can get the news instantly in Kerala, which is not something which would have happened 20 years ago. And obviously that will frustrate you because you will think, "Oh, what are we doing this if people don't, if it's, is it just going to keep going on and on? Is there any end to the cycle?" Frankly, in my case and most of my co-workers, I would say we've reached that stage of acceptance. We've accepted that yes, there probably will be a couple of more waves. Yes, there's still going to be a lot of restrictions for us. For those who are still working in COVID, we still may not get to see our families on time. It might be months before we see them again. Or as Dr. Niranjan Setty said, years even. We've had no other option. We have had to accept. Like he said, he's at least, he suffered more than me in that sense. I would say I've at least seen my parents twice in the last 2 years, but I have to take that as it is. As in, I'm happy I got to see them at least twice.
It's such a difficult thing to deal with this unprecedented situation. It sounds very terrible. Thank you for your comments, sir. And
Thank
my
you.
next questions are to Dr. Setty. My first question is given that doctors have had to isolate themselves from their families and friends during this pandemic, could you please throw light on how stressful it actually is to completely isolate yourself, to not be in touch, to not be in anyone's company?
Sorry, Swami, Jenny, can you just repeat that question again? I mean, I couldn't understand the last bit.
Given that you have had to isolate yourself from your family, from your friends, how have you managed to, as if I may, keep sane during this period? How have you managed to keep your sanity during this period so that you just do not lose complete control of yourself? How did you manage to do it?
All right. So I think this is more of a, like a personal question. Yeah. So the thing is, I mean, the first thing is, like Dr. Roshan was saying, we have accepted our fate. So I think initially it was denial, anger, bargaining. You tend to, why should I face all this? Why should I do all this? So you tend to question that. But at the end of the day, there is always a bit of hope here and there. Like one is, compared to others' life, at least you are earning monthly, and you have your salary, you have your life, and you're alive at the end of the day. So you should look at some positive aspects of it, because if you start looking at only negative aspects of it, you can't work, you can't do justice to your job, and you can't live every day, so it becomes an issue. So like I said, this is where the mental health aspect of the every worker, it's just not healthcare workers, every person, every individual is different. So we need to address that wherever we are working. If there are some colleagues or co-workers or junior doctors, whoever it is, we need to look at every person differently, and every person handles stress differently. So in my case, for me, I had a couple of friends, so I used to hang out whenever I get time, and so it depends individual basis. So that's where it becomes some of my friends, they couldn't handle it, so some took 3 months break, some left the job. So every person is different, so we need to look at the triggers, like how individual person handles it, and we need to address it before it kind of explodes, or it becomes a worsening scenario for them. So I would say that we should not look at only the negative aspect of it. We should consider positive aspect. We should look at some positive in it, to continue working and do what we can do to save some patients. So that's how I look at it.
Thank you, sir, for addressing the question. I have another pertinent question, that is, frontline workers have been subjected to social distancing as if they are the only transmitters of the virus. Why do you think has the society responded to people this way, even after the frontline workers have risked their lives to serve the society as a whole?
Um, I think there are two aspects to it. One is initially when the pandemic started, no one knew anything about the virus, including ourselves. Actually, including ourselves, we were trying to learn everything about the virus, and there was too much information on the social media for people to access. So it became a double-edged sword for everyone. So they thought that the virus comes from. Obviously, it was transmissible from person to person. So obviously, since we are all exposed to the virus, so people thought that we are the only source to transmit the virus. And when the whole India was under lockdown, so the only place where people can catch the virus was from the frontline workers. So there was a bit of miscommunication from the media to the people, and WhatsApp became a major easy way of communicating misinformation, misunderstanding, and rumors and gossip. So it kind of was a more of a social media, and also not aware of how the virus was initially. But now I think it's come down to some extent, and now people are trying to learn, and they are trying to understand, and by this time so many people are infected or vaccinated, or they've gathered their information, so it's come down now. But yes, it was initially there, but I think it was mostly due to lack of awareness, and also a lot of miscommunication through media.
Yes, a lack of awareness and proper sensitization are definitely the reasons behind this. Thank you very much, Dr. Setty, for answering both our questions. And with this, we bring this session to an end. Thank you very much, panelists, for being here with us and giving us your time. We could discuss how the pandemic has jeopardized the lives of the frontline workers, the apathy meted out to them despite their selfless services when a pandemic was ravaging the world. And not just as a speakers tonight, just as frontline workers for serving the society, the nation during these times. I want to thank all of you here. It was a very enriching and interesting session, and we got to learn a lot from your first-hand experiences, because we don't get to engage with frontline workers this way every day. So, thank you very much. And drawing the session to a close here. Good night, panelists, and good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Shomi.